You ready? Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast, the GROklahoma podcast show, which is an initiative of the Tracking and Evaluation Core of the OCTSI, where we highlight the processes of CTR research in Oklahoma and those who support them. Today I have Dr. Tim VanWagoner. He's not a stranger to any of you listening to this, right? He's the Associate Director of the OCTSI with a focus on basic biomedical research, pediatric infectious diseases, and bioinformatics. He holds leadership positions in various institutional awards, including being the Deputy Director and Program Coordinator of the Oklahoma Shared Clinical and Translational Resources, which is the OCTR. As the PI of the CTN, he's been funded extensively by various organizations, including the NIH, and his efforts are really directed towards implementing so many things in Oklahoma. For example, lung cancer screening in rural primary care practices through combined clinical trials and research projects. He's done extensive work in just, expanding CTR in Oklahoma. Please join us in welcoming Dr. VanWagoner to the podcast. Hello.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Really, really happy to have you here. So let's start from the basics. Where and how did you grow up?
Oh, well, I grew up in Montana, actually, in South Central Montana, not far from Yellowstone Park.
Oh, that's far away from home.
Yes, I'm far away from home, both in terms of distance, but also general environment. Obviously, we don't have mountains here in Oklahoma, nor do much of the wildlife eat you, but that's okay.
Were there any events in your upbringing that influenced your decision to pursue a career in research?
That's a really good question. I don't come from a background of family members that really went to college. Neither of my birth parents even graduated from high school, but I was not a wonderfully great student in high school. I was more of an athlete. But I also kind of realized that the only classes I really liked were classes like calculus and physics. And so, maybe I needed to become a scientist, because those other things just weren't things that captured my attention well enough to study really hard for. Now, when I went to college, things changed a lot. So I went to college. I got really excited about science, and particularly, I'd started out wanting to be a physicist, but just took a biology class as a general ed requirement, and really fell in love with molecular biology. And so that fascinated me so much. And so when I was taking my undergraduate courses, I was blown away. But there's a guy named Krebs that found all of these, proteins that are part of the citric acid cycle, or, those sorts of things. So that really led me to decide I really wanted to go to graduate school rather than other options.
Wow. This is one of the reasons why I love these questions, because you just never know people's story unless you hear more about them. So I got to know a lot about you just from that response you gave. So how did you find your way at OU, and why this particular institution?
I went to a local school here in Oklahoma called Oklahoma Christian University, and when I graduated from there, I figured I would probably end up going back to Montana for a while, and not sure what I was going to do. But then I had applied to graduate school in microbiology in Norman, and they offered me a graduate teaching assistantship, and so I jumped all over that because I thought that was pretty cool. I wasn't really big into public speaking. Turns out I was really good at it, but was always kind of nervous about it. So, starting out as a fresh college graduate and now teaching students was pretty neat. And I got my first opportunity to teach a full lecture course the summer of my first year in graduate school, and really fell in love with all of that. So then the professor I was doing my PhD under left OU, and so I kind of was in this crisis mode. So I had probably everything I needed to finish my PhD, but I just needed to finish writing really, and maybe one or two more experiments. And so I was fortunate that at the time I was working on Haemophilus influenzae, a bacteria that, depending on the form of it, can cause everything from meningitis to being one of the leading causes of ear infections. And so there was somebody here at the Health Sciences Center that also was an expert in Haemophilus influenza, and that was Dr. Terrence Stoll, who was the chair of pediatrics. So he said, "Hey, come on up, and you can do whatever experiments you need to do, and finish it up." So very quickly, they offered me a postdoc, and so I started my postdoc, and not really finished with my PhD yet, but was able to do both and wrap that up. And then I've just I really like the environment here. There's a lot of other things related to that too, but I do think it's a great institution, and I'm really loyal and committed to seeing what I can do to make it better, rather than to just constantly change and move somewhere else to find something that might be marginally better in this one area, but perhaps worse in another area. I like to build things, so I mentioned that my family not really a college family typically. So my stepfather and my brother and others all are contractors. Wow. So I come from a building background, and so I do enjoy conceptualizing and building programs.
Interesting. As I was preparing for an episode with you, I had to look you up on the internet. And I saw your name on Oklahoma Christian University as a professor of biology. I'm like, what are the odds that in Oklahoma with the same first name and the same last name? But I wasn't sure it was you. So thanks for clarifying that. So let's talk about your role within OCTSI, especially in basic biomedical research. For those who are not very familiar what that is about, can you just give us some short tidbits on your role as the associate director?
So you mentioned the Oklahoma Christian University. So I had mentioned that I really enjoyed teaching. So while I was a postdoc, I'd done a couple things. I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life at a research bench as a molecular biologist. I liked it, but I was really frustrated because a lot of my research required human samples, and in particularly some really hard to acquire samples. I worked in otitis media, which is inflammation of the middle ear, and was trying to get human samples from that. And even earlier in my career was doing some work in cancer, and it was always difficult to get enough samples to develop new technologies, which was what I was doing. And so I was a little frustrated about that, the fact that there wasn't sort of this infrastructure that made it easy. You had to find the right person and hope they had the time, and that would help you to get the samples and that sort of a thing, and hope that you didn't need too many of them in order to develop your techniques. So, I was a little frustrated with all of that. I was also a little, I knew that no matter what I wanted to do, I needed to have more business experience, because, you go through a bachelor's degree and a PhD in sciences, you don't really learn about marketing and general administration, HR, things like that. So I started working on an MBA at OU also. Then, I had gone to give a talk at my alma mater, and they said they had an open faculty position. And since it's local, I assumed that, I could, try to maybe do two things at once, fulfill that love of teaching that I have, also with getting some more experience in administration, as well as to continue to do research. So I took a position as an assistant professor at my alma mater while maintaining a position here as a research assistant professor in pediatrics. And I continued doing that for quite a while. I very quickly got tapped to be the department chair because of the other experiences I had. So I got that opportunity. And then when the OSCTR was initially funded, I had worked with all of the other investigators that had put together the original applications to develop a CTSA site for Oklahoma. That's a Clinical and Translational Science Award that replaced the old GCRCs on campuses. So I'd worked with Hal Schofield and Tim Lyons and Judith James and others to help develop those original applications. So when the OSCTR was funded, Judith James, who's the principal investigator, came to me and asked me if I would like to be part of getting it off the ground and starting this new Translational Science Institute. So that's what I did. And so ever since, we've built this infrastructure that, turns out to be exactly what I was always frustrated about not having. And we're still building, obviously, but to have a core of clinical research assistants and biobanking, and so forth, and the bioinformatics resources and all those other things that really help make a successful organization.
I mean, I think the moral of this story is just how you've taken something, like you said, your pain points and finding a way to make it work, but also building opportunities for those around you. I think that's very impressive. Thanks for sharing that.
I would say, one of the things that was, I mentioned that, my major professor left during my PhD, and I don't blame her or anything, but that was a bit of a crisis at that time, because he left to go to a private company that was doing a bunch of DoD work, and so there was no way that I could really, follow and complete my PhD in that situation. But I'd been in this environment in which we kind of run out of not having enough funds, and it's the struggle of that. And being by myself, really just with a professor, that was my major professor. And so team science, when I came here to work for Terry Stoll, he had multiple professors in his lab, research assistant or research associate professors. And I got to be part of teams and see what that's like, and have lots of people you can run ideas by. And you're not entirely dependent upon most of yourself and just your professor, plus having, more money to do, when you have a grand idea and you want to do something, having access to the funds to do that. So that was great. So that's the other thing about the OCTSI is we are all about team science and bringing people together. And if you look at what my CV is and what I work on now, they're not necessarily things that I'm well trained on. I now do a lot of research in community engagement and practice-based research out in communities, and I bring certain skills to that, but I'm not a clinician. There are clinicians that bring their skills to that, and so forth. And we have people that are trained in statistics and all that. I think it's great that when you can bring together all of these different individuals with interests or experiences that are very different from each other, bring them together to make if you use a baking analogy, to make a cake that's much, much better than the individual components would be.
So true. I think that's a very good analogy. The rich cake with different layers and different flavors. So let's talk about...
Yeah, I mean, parts of that cake are usually pretty good, but if you like a chocolate cake and you try tasting cocoa, cocoa isn't very good on its own.
Let's talk about OCTSI, which is the Oklahoma Shared Clinical and Translational Resources, right? You've been involved as the Deputy Director and Program Coordinator. By the way, first of all, congrats on the recent 5-year refunding. Yeah. So I had 2 questions to that. Tell us more about the resources that are available and how they support researchers in Oklahoma through translational research efforts. And then the second bit of that, which I'm able to repeat, once you're done with the first one, just in case, will be with this new funding, what are you most excited about or even looking forward to accomplishing, considering the similarity to your previous work?
Absolutely. So, there's a couple things. The OCTR has its as a National Institutes of Health funded IDEA CTR. It's part of the overall IDEA program at the NIH, which is a program that funds institutional development in states, in about half the states in the U.S. that have a tradition of having relatively lower success rates at getting NIH funding. So Oklahoma is one of those. Now, we're a very successful IDEA state, but for those listening to the podcast, there are a number of other mechanisms that people might know in the state that are part of these same the same program, including the INBRAEs and COBRAEs and others. But the CTRs are pretty special, and so there's two components of that that I think are important. Not only what we do as a CTR and the infrastructure we build locally, but also being part of a nationwide network that brings together researchers from institutions just like us. So on the first part, the OSCTR itself has a lot of great resources to help build research. There's a lot of things that people don't know that we do. There's the things that people are really, really familiar with, like our pilot grant program, in which we funded more than 15 junior investigators so far and helped them to develop their research careers. And that has led to now, I believe, more than 70 million in independent NIH funding that those individuals have now received over the past 10 years. And that's really exciting to be part of these individuals' first NIH awards. That's very special. And in these cases, we're investing, in their projects, but more than anything, we're investing in these individuals as individuals and wanting to see their careers launch. So the pilot grant program is great. We've got the biostatistics, epidemiology, and research design core, which a lot of people have utilized. They've helped on more than 1,000 projects to investigators across the state, not just here at OUHSC, but our tribal nations and other institutes across the state. And we have a professional development core, which provides a lot of different ways for people to get additional training in clinical and translational research, especially those that may have a clinical background, but unlike me, didn't spend a bunch of time at a bench and learn how to formulate research plans and so forth. So that's another great program. We have a community engagement and outreach program that's been absolutely so impactful in the state, and we could spend hours talking about all the things that's led to. But we have a lot of partnerships with Stevenson Cancer Center over that. Partnerships throughout the state with tribal nations, the Public Health Institute of Oklahoma, and others. Then we have a clinical resources core, which is a really great opportunity for individuals to get assistance in clinical research. The boots on the ground in many ways to help get the samples that they need, processing, regulatory support if you're trying to transition your research from the bench eventually to the bedside. And then finally, and as part of all of this work, the continued ongoing work that we're doing for developing things like REDCap, which most people don't realize the OSCTR is behind the REDCap in a partnership with pediatrics here, and then also the development of and implementation of the different things we have around the clinical trials management systems and new things that we're going to be doing, with new EHR rollouts and that sort of thing to help facilitate data-based clinical research. So, and then of course we have our our evaluation core that you're part of, and so things like this podcast, but also building infrastructure for evaluation. We don't have enough capacity in that case, not just for grants like the OCTR, but when you bring all the idea programs together, plus other really, really large institutional awards that are in Oklahoma. It's great to have evaluation, not just because it's required, but because it tells you, it helps you to tell your story, but also to identify the areas in which you're not really meeting your goals, or perhaps your goals are incorrect because that's not really what's ultimately needed. So that's the OSCTR in a nutshell. But I mentioned there's two components of it, not just what we provide locally, but we've been part of some really large and great collaborations across the country, driven in many ways by the COVID pandemic. The pandemic's been terrible. I mean, there's no question that it's been an awful experience for everybody. That having been said, it has provided a lot of opportunities for the OSCTR and other CTRs across the country to grow together around shared needs and foci. And so, we've been one of the most successful groups across the country to recruiting people to the NIH long COVID study. We've been some of the leading institutions in acquiring data for what's called the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, which is designed to help try to take all that medical data we have and figure out what was really working for the pandemic, as well as who was most affected. So, hopefully next time as something like this happens, we can do a much better job at identifying the best treatment modalities, potentially treat a disease, as well as who needs to be focused on as the most vulnerable in the population. So lots of great things like that. And we've got other collaborations coming. But just being part of large networks like that means that we're not relying only on OU and what resources we have here, but there may be resources at the University of Nebraska or West Virginia or Mississippi or somewhere else that, there's some expertise there that they have that we don't, and expertise that we have that they're in desperate need of. And so we can collaborate together in order to help our very similar populations among our states.
That's impressive. I think that's really a full definition of teen science, and leveraging, strengths within states to, come up with something beautiful. Thanks for even going into in-depth details about the different cores and how they can be quite supportive of investigators. With the pilot funding, I can imagine being an early career investigator, how that will come in handy, and even the mentoring as well, and just the availability of so many resources. So thank you for that. Now, what are some of the planned collaboratives around specific clinical trials and also clinical staff training that you have been involved with?
Yeah, so we've got, we do have some plans. We have a current grant out there that has had a just-in-time request, and that's a collaboration with West Virginia and other CTRs to develop a clinical coordinator training a network, which would be pretty exciting, not just to train clinical research staff, here at OU, but, really at any of our partner institutions. So hopefully we'll make some progress on that. The NIH has done a lot of work in developing something called the Diamond Portal in the last couple of years. We'd like to implement more of that. But sometimes doing that sort of thing requires you to, at least aggregate activities within an institution. So, right now we still are somewhat siloized with respect to that sort of staff activities. And so we'd like to do is, to eventually, collaborate with some of the larger centers on campus that do clinical research to make sure that, staff all have, adequate training and peer support and so forth that's necessary. So that sort of thing is really exciting. And the more clinical trials that we do, the more staff get experience in working in everything from these large NIH, trials like Recover that, we were recruiting like 18,000 patients across the country to, a small trial that will be launching soon around, that's still a multi-network site, but it only involve 10 or 12 people around a particular drug, 10 or 12 people locally around a particular nutraceutical to help deal with long COVID. So we got all of these broad groups of things that we're working on. And then the other side of that is obviously on the faculty side is we do need, we always are in need of more clinicians interested in being part of clinical trials. And so one of the things we want to do here as part of the OCTSI, not necessarily OSCTR, but the OCTSI is make it easier for clinicians to be involved in clinical research by them not having to do everything. So as I mentioned, I'm not a clinician, but I am a PI on a lot of clinical trials. Yeah. And so what I do is I do all of the annoying work.
The building work, Tim. The building work.
Yeah, the busy work, and and then the clinicians can see patients and do the other things like that, but don't have to be as concerned with filling out all the paperwork or trying to manage the staff and things like that.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thanks. In your position, especially the many hats you wear, I can imagine it's not always a walk in the park. Are you able to share with us a time that was one of the most challenging for you and how you went about just navigating that?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. There are times, anytime you have a large grant submission, probably, or a couple at the same time, you get better at it as your career goes on. I would say early in my career, I probably struggled with that. And I already had mentioned, especially when my mentor left, every grant, every small grant would seem like this huge big deal. Now I, do grants that are substantially larger than that, and sometimes they're a big deal and sometimes they're not. I don't know. I hate to say this, but I'm probably one of those people that I would, as a young person, I was an adrenaline junkie sort of person. I loved sports. I liked doing, whatever, skiing off a cliff or riding a bike in a way that was probably inappropriate. So I'm probably lucky to be alive. But I suppose to some way I rely upon that stress, the stress of a grant or something else to truly, feel alive maybe. So I wouldn't say there's probably, anything other than maybe a week before something's due that I could say that there was ever a time other than that, other than either starting this institute up with Dr. James or that, where we were brand spanking new and trying to, even figure out how you get telephones on campus or something else like that. That and again, the aforementioned, early part of my career.
Thank you. So let's talk about, I got that part. Let's talk about Oklahoma. Oklahoma is unique in the sense that most of we have a larger portion of federally rural designated land. And I imagine it poses a unique challenge, but also the uniqueness about it is that there's more work in the community that needs to be done. And I know you've done quite a lot of work in bridging communities together, especially the tribal nations. For those who might be venturing into a research area where they're not familiar with, or working in populations that are not, part of how they grew up, what are some tips that you could share on bridging the gap, especially when you're coming from academia and working in the community, and given just how sometimes those two entities, we as academics, we need to do a lot of work in improving the trust and improving communication. What are some best practices in working with those special populations in the context of Oklahoma being very rural, and that might not be something very easy to navigate?
Oh, no, number one is listening. That's number one thing that's important to do, and not being an academic going in there and I know everything and whatever you're doing is wrong. Now, sometimes what's going on is wrong, but that's not always the case. So listening to what a community really needs and really wants. That was and we're talking about any community. We oftentimes think of community-based research as only being, marginalized communities or, some community that like a rural community or African American community or American Indian community. But in reality, everything's a community. Your peers are a community. If you're talking about something in primary care, I remember early in my career thinking of all these tests I would develop, and this great thing would help you be able to do X, Y, or Z in a clinical practice, and you could, this would be easy, and you'd be able to, figure out this, whether this person has this rare disease or whatever else like that. That's coming up with an idea and asking somebody else to. Some other community to adapt to what you think is the greatest thing, without recognizing and sitting down with that community and saying, do you want this? Is this feasible? And so I bring up something like primary care. You've got 15 minutes max with a patient. You don't have time to do everything. You don't have time to isolate everything possible from them or anything else like that. And the same is true of any other, what we normally think of community based issues. If we're talking about a rural community, American Indian community, you need to know what they want and meet them where they want. To be able to do that is not coming up with the ideas yourself and then going and finding partners to work with you. It's having partnerships and figuring out what those partners want. Now, that doesn't mean you don't help them to shape those ideas into what is possible, or what funders are interested in funding or things like that. But you have to have those communication long before you developed a grant or proposal or something else like that. If you really want to be successful and you really want to make an impact on community.
I like that. Listening and then also asking yourself, if you build it, would they come? So incorporating them and involving them every step of the way. Those are really good tips to live by.
Yes. Partners aren't somebody who comes in at the very end of something and says, oh yeah, we'll provide you patients, or we'll distribute information for you. Partners are people that are part of something, from the beginning.
So true. So true. We're rounding up soon, but I had a couple more questions. So can you tell us about a significant milestone or breakthrough in your career that stands out to you? And I imagine this is very, very hard because you've accomplished so much.
Yeah, I probably sound like someone who is highly traumatized. But finishing that PhD after my mentor left, and honestly, in some ways, staying in science, I was burned out, and I was looking for other options. One of those was I was all prepped to go to law school and potentially do patent law. Now, would I have enjoyed that? No, I'd have been that weirdo they leave, and that nobody wants to talk to because he's, he's doing this other kind of stuff. But I was pretty burned out on that. But I got really excited about being part of a team, and helping to get some grants, and I had one small issue where I wrote a fellowship grant to the NIH, and it got triaged immediately without a score or anything else, simply because they said I was in roughly the same environment that I'd done my PhD in, because it's the University of Oklahoma. Well, the University of Oklahoma, Norman, and the Health Science Center are not the same thing. But so that was a little depressing. But then we turned around and the colleagues took that same idea, and we were able to Yeah, get it funded as an R01 with almost a perfect score. And so I was just a co-investigator instead of being the PI, but that told me that there were ideas that I could have ideas, and just finding the right place to sell those ideas was important. I think that's always the case with any of these things is to not give up. And it would have been easy for me to give up, but I'm probably too bullheaded on that. So I think that's probably the most exciting or milestone that was probably important for me was really sticking it out, and then seeing a couple of those ideas get funded early. And then after that, obviously, every time the OCTR has gotten renewed or some other big award. Another big one was the Oklahoma Pediatric Clinical Trials Network, where we got that funded, and it had another exceptional score, and that was pretty exciting.
Thanks for sharing that, especially with your grad school moment and the Arrow one. I imagine that was a confidence boost, finally able to get that funded. So let's talk about just the future of clinical and translational research in Oklahoma. What are some of the areas you hope to make an impact in moving forward?
Oh, long term, and these are always hard. You as an evaluator know this. Oklahoma is always near the bottom of the country in terms of overall health, and there's not. We can't fix that as an institution, or as a single grant. Nevertheless, we can continue to help move the needle forward. So I think continuing to do things like we did at the early, once the opioid pandemic was recognized, we've been part of multiple studies, whether it be helping primary care clinicians better understand how they should address pain management in patients. We've been working a number of grants related to that, or help babies with that are born with neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome. We've been doing a lot of work on there. We can make a difference here and there. With long COVID, we have a huge proportion of our population that has dealt with that. And if there are things that we can do both locally and nationally to help alleviate that, and then we continue to have what I suspect will be issues with vaccination, not just for COVID. My biggest fear is that the vaccine hesitancy that developed during COVID will lead to a reduction in the uptake of all the other vaccines. Again, I come from a pediatric infectious disease background. I'm fearful of what happens if measles and mumps and rubella and polio or any of these come back in our population. Things that we whipped, and are some of the most important successes we've made in science in history. The fact that kids no longer routinely die in their early period from preventable diseases is amazing. So, I want to make sure that we are there, knowing this could happen, that we are prepped and primed and ready to help try to address that. And so we've got that in the general overall health, but to continue to see the major advances we're seeing in addressing health disparities in Oklahoma. We've got a long ways to go. There are some things that have gotten worse, but there are other areas that hopefully are getting better. But to help our populations that have health disparities, and that includes our large American Indian population in Oklahoma, our African American population, our rural population, and we'll expect to see, as that population begins to age more, certainly more health disparities occurring in our Hispanic population. And so all of these areas are areas we want to make sure that that we are identifying the areas before they become so big and so problematic that it becomes almost intractable to address.
Wow. And I like how you tied the unique challenges we have to some of your future goals as what you're excited about. I think it goes to show just the passion you have for making those impacts and building things that work and last long. So thanks for sharing all of that. Um, the future is AI, as we're saying, with the emerging of hyperintelligence. What's the future, would you say, about of biomedical research and its integration with AI? And in what ways is OSCTR actively preparing for this paradigm shift?
I don't think we're anywhere near ready yet for that. On our perspective, we certainly need to do more research in that area. Where I can see some of the biggest impacts on that is on the healthcare IT aspects and potentially in the diagnosis of disease. AI can only do so much when it comes to research. It can't come up with new ideas. It can't do the bench science. It can't collect the patients. It can't do all those other things like that. But it could certainly help us to, we've got an enormous amount of data out there if people are willing to share it. And that obviously is a political question that goes far beyond this sort of thing. But, we here in Oklahoma, we have an opportunity with a statewide health information exchange to have data. And if we can figure out a way that protects people's privacy, which I'm sure they have done, and other things like that, if people would understand that we could use that data to advance people's health overall, is a huge opportunity. And that's where I think AI, one of the places where AI can help a lot, is to help identify patterns in health that maybe we didn't even know we need to ask a question about. And so I think that's great. And I'm sure we'll see a lot of the use of AI, especially to help to diagnose and potentially treat rare diseases. Yeah. I mean, if you think about how long it typically takes for somebody to get certain diagnoses after their initial encounter with a clinician, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Parkinson's or lupus or lots of different things like that. If we could use AI to help better identify, cancer risk and things like that, based upon the environmental exposures and so forth. I think those are big areas. This unfortunately is not an area of expertise for me, but I might be getting too old to take on learning something new. But no, I'm excited about it. I'm also somewhat scared though, in ways, not for me as a researcher, but just as society, because there's a little bit of it is when you see how quickly it can mislead. It's only as good as the information that's in it, and if you're taking a bunch of bad information in it, I've seen enough little experiments where somebody asked a question and it turned something completely, bad out there. So as long as people are going to end up being very careful about the data that's being trained on these AI models, I think they're really exciting.
I think it just reinforces that we as humans are still going to be the gatekeepers for making sure that the utility of it far outweighs the risk that comes out of it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, the problem is it's sometimes hard to decide who's going to be the gatekeeper.
Who's going to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner?
We certainly see that. People there are people out there that have differing views on certain facts, and so if people only trust the data if they trust the gatekeeper.
So true. So we've talked a lot about our professional life. As we round off, I wanted to know, outside of your professional work, what are some of your hobbies or interests that you enjoy pursuing?
Oh, wow. I still do a lot of woodworking and home improvement stuff because of my background. I still enjoy doing that sort of thing. But for other hobbies, I love to fly fish. It's about all I know how to. I don't know how to do the other types of fishing. Fly fishing, yeah. So the thing I love about fly fishing is it's something that you have to, you're out in nature. There's several places in Oklahoma that you can do great fly fishing here in Oklahoma. But it's really hard to focus on work or think about work or do anything else when all you're thinking about is where you want to place that fly. I don't care if I catch a fish. I don't keep them anyway. I always release them. I use barbless hooks, all that stuff. But I just enjoy being out in nature and enjoying nature. So that, and I do love to play golf. So.
Okay. Fly fishing, that's very interesting. On a lighter note, if you could choose one superpower to aid you in your research endeavors, what would it be and why? And this is my last question, by the way.
Okay, superpower. This is kind of embarrassing. I have never read a comic book in my life, and I've only seen a few superhero movies, so I don't know what all the potential possibilities out there. So somebody could say this, something, super awesome. Like, why did I not choose that? I don't know why I'm the worst science nerd. I guess if there was a superpower to never forget anything you learn.
Oh wow, that's a good one. For someone that doesn't really do it.
I don't know if that's a real superpower, and it's probably a super curse too, because there are probably certain. I mean, the brain. It's very important to not remember some things, and as a scientist, it's super important to be able to go. You know what? I failed 90% of my time, and the fact I could turn that off and continue going to work every day when most of your work is a failure. But no, I'd say if every time I go to a seminar or read a paper, if I could retain all of that information, that'd be super awesome.
That's a very good one, actually. I was really creative for that. And like one of my my favorite TV personalities, Monk. He's a detective. He would say it's a blessing and a curse.
I like Yep. I already have a pretty good memory, but I do realize as I get older, it's fading some. But just the ability to retain stuff about so many different areas, not just the areas of expertise, but to know something about all these different areas. You sit through so many different seminars and other things like that, and you think that's really cool. And you remember part of it, but you don't remember enough sometimes of it to actually implement it. So.
I want to say thank you. I've learned, so much about your processes and just even tapping into a tiny bit of your mind and things you're excited about and how you got started and the work you do in bridging communities together and expanding resources for early career investigators like me and even for more senior colleagues as well. Just want to say thank you so much for your time, and I know I'll bring you back again, obviously, but I don't know what capacity, but we definitely have to bring you back to explore, more of the work you're doing. And just want to say thank you. This was a very, very enlightening episode.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And I feel very strongly how great this opportunity is to have a podcast like this and to be able to share stuff, about scientists, and so that in many ways you guys that your listeners, whether they're scientists or anybody else, will get to know each other a little bit better. And how many other people on campus know that I love to fly fish?
Exactly.
Probably not that many.
Now, maybe you might even have friends who might want to fly fish with you as a result of this podcast.
Probably. I imagine I'm going to have some people saying, hey, next time you go out, can I come with you?
There we go then. Anyways, thank you so much, Tim, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Absolutely, Mo. You take care.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on this insightful episode with Dr. VanWagoner. We hope you found his expertise and experiences in biomedical research and clinical trials truly enlightening. His dedication to advancing translational science and improving healthcare outcomes, for me, I found out very, very inspiring. So as we conclude this episode, we encourage you to stay curious and continue exploring the exciting advancements in CTR in Oklahoma. Remember that your support and engagement plays a vital role in shaping the future of our healthcare system. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring conversations with experts and those who support them. Thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to bringing you more informative content in the future. Until next time, keep striving for innovation and making a positive impact in the world of research. I remain your host, Dr. Mo. Bye for now, and take care.